I came home to find a bright orange paper taped to my grandpa's front door. Eviction. Notice, in bold letters. For a moment, I thought I'd walked onto a crime scene, the color so loud it practically screamed across the porch. My suitcase hit the ground with a thud, and the air went out of me like someone had sucker-punched my lungs. Grandpa's rocking chair creaked as he sat there, still in his flannel shirt, staring at the paper as if it might explode. You don't just slap an eviction notice on a man's home, especially not a veteran who's lived in that house for 30 years. You don't humiliate him in front of his neighbors, who were already peeking through blinds and whispering across driveways. And you definitely don't do it because of roses and a birdhouse. But that's exactly what Marlene Whitaker, queen of our HOA and self-appointed gatekeeper of suburban perfection, had done. It felt like a punchline to a cruel joke. Grandpa's so-called violations included overgrown landscaping, unsightly decor, and, my personal favorite, unauthorized wildlife attraction device. Translation: his rose bushes needed trimming. His American flag birdhouse wasn't on the approved list, and apparently sparrows now counted as a neighborhood threat. I ripped the paper off the door, crumpled it in my fist, and tossed it onto the porch table. "When did this go up?" I asked. "Yesterday," Grandpa muttered. His voice was gravelly but soft, like he'd been holding the weight of that paper all night. "Guess it's time to move on. Don't need trouble." Move on? The man had fought overseas, raised a family, and kept the same porch light glowing every night like a beacon. And Marlene thought she could just evict him with office paper and a pushpin? I paced the porch, the faint smell of roses mixing with the sharp ink of that notice. "Grandpa, this isn't legal. HOAs don't evict people. They can fine you, harass you, sure, but they can't take your house." He shrugged. "Marlene says otherwise." Of course she did. Marlene Whitaker loved rules the way most people love wine. She quoted bylaws like scripture, and if the rule didn't exist, she invented it. Her favorite trick was intimidation. Big, bold letters in all caps, threats slipped under doors, public shaming at meetings where she wielded her gavel like a judge in a kangaroo court. I could practically hear her voice in my head. We must maintain standards for the good of the community. Standards meaning whatever made her house look better. I stormed inside, tossed my jacket over a chair, and flipped open Grandpa's mail pile. Sure enough, 3 letters from the HOA sat there unopened, each one with that same stiff header: Notice of Non-Compliance. I skimmed them quickly. First, the roses. Second, the birdhouse. Third, some nonsense about lawn furniture visible from the street. Apparently, Grandpa's lawn chairs, 2 faded green ones from the 80s, were a threat to property values. "Why didn't you tell me about these?" I asked. "Didn't want to bother you," he said, eyes fixed on the TV, though it wasn't even on. "Figured I'd pay the fines, maybe trim the bushes." That was the thing about him. He hated conflict. He'd rather bend than break, but I wasn't built like that. Not when it came to family. I took the crumpled eviction notice and smoothed it flat on the table. At the bottom, in neat typed print, was the kicker. Failure to vacate within 14 days will result in further legal action. And beneath that, Marlene's signature in her looping, self-important handwriting. 14 days. She was actually trying to scare an 80-year-old man out of his home in 2 weeks. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood. Sure enough, the whispers had already spread. Mrs. Caldwell leaned over her fence and whispered, "I heard he's being forced out. Shame about the birdhouse." Mr. Daniels, jogging by, muttered, "Marlene's making an example." Everywhere I turned, people knew, people judged, and no one questioned Marlene's authority. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around that week, I was ready. I sat in the front row, Grandpa at my side, his hands folded in his lap like a man headed to trial. Marlene stood at the head of the folding table, pearls shining under the fluorescent lights, gavel poised. "Let's begin," she said sweetly, her eyes flicking toward us like daggers. We have a matter of non-compliance regarding Mr. Whitaker's property. Gasps and murmurs. She thrived on that. She spread her papers like evidence, pointing to photos of roses, the birdhouse, the lawn chairs, each one more ridiculous than the last. According to Section 12, Article 4, she said, tapping the bylaws, the board has authority to enforce removal of persistent violations, up to and including eviction proceedings. Eviction proceedings? I cut in, my voice carrying across the room. That's not in your bylaws. I've read them, twice. The HOA doesn't have the authority to evict anyone. All you can do is fine people. You're bluffing. Marlene's smile didn't waver, but her eyes tightened. We take our standards seriously. If Mr. Whitaker cannot comply, we'll escalate as necessary. A neighbor whispered, "Can she really do that?" Another hissed, "Don't cross, Marlene." That was her power, fear and confusion. If people believed she could, she could. But I wasn't going to let her win that easily. I leaned forward. "Escalate all you want. You'll be hearing from us." It wasn't much, but it was enough to wipe that smug look off her face for the briefest second. Grandpa shifted beside me, surprised at my tone, but I squeezed his hand. Because if Marlene wanted a fight, she was about to get one. And this time, I wasn't just going to play defense. The next HOA meeting felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a courtroom where Marlene had already written the verdict. Her gavel cracked against the table, sharp as a gunshot, and the Karens in the front row leaned forward like jurors waiting for sentencing. I wasn't naive. I knew the script. Marlene would accuse, her lackeys would clap, and my grandfather would be paraded as the villain dragging down community standards. But if she thought I'd sit quietly in the defendant's chair, she had another thing coming. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and burned coffee from the lobby urn. Rows of neighbors shifted on metal chairs, some curious, some already decided, all of them watching like this was primetime television. "Order," Marlene said, though no one was speaking yet. She loved the theater of it, the way her pearl earrings swung when she tilted her head, the deliberate pause before she spoke again. "We have a matter regarding Mr. Whitaker's repeated violations. As president, I must ensure we maintain property values and protect the integrity of our neighborhood." Property values. Integrity. She wielded those words like weapons. I stood before she could launch into her slideshow of shame. "Let's be clear," I said. "My grandfather's so-called violations amount to rose bushes and a birdhouse, hardly grounds for eviction." Patricia, one of Marlene's loyal soldiers, gasped dramatically. "It's not just a birdhouse. It's an unauthorized structure attracting pests." "Pests?" I laughed. "You mean sparrows?" The room tittered, but Marlene slammed her gavel. "This is no joke. Neighbors have reported decline in yard appearance directly tied to Mr. Whitaker's property." "Neighbors?" I asked. "Or just your inner circle who complain about anything that doesn't match your beige siding?" A few people chuckled. Marlene's smile stayed fixed, but her jaw twitched. "We are discussing facts, not insults." "Then show me the facts," I shot back. "Show me the clause in your bylaws that says you can evict someone for flowers, or for owning a birdhouse shaped like the American flag." She froze for just a second, then pivoted. "This board reserves the right to escalate repeat violations. Fines have gone unpaid." "Because he doesn't owe them," I said, my voice rising. "Because you made them up." The whispers grew louder now, rippling across the rows. Some nodded with me, others stiffened in Marlene's favor, but the crack in her authority was there. That was the meeting's mini-climax, the first time I felt the room shift. But Marlene, ever the performer, knew how to claw it back. She lifted a manila folder, fanning out photographs like evidence at trial. Grainy shots of my grandfather's yard, zoomed-in angles of overgrown rose stems, a close-up of the birdhouse at sunset. "Taken by concerned residents," she announced, documenting the persistent neglect. Concerned residents. I knew exactly who she meant. Because in the days after that first eviction notice, I'd noticed cars slowing in front of our house at odd hours, camera flashes in the early morning, shadows in the yard at dusk. Once, I even caught Patricia crouched by the mailbox, snapping pictures of the lawn chairs. When I confronted her, she chirped, "Just keeping the neighborhood safe," before scurrying away. They weren't concerned. They were spies, feeding Marlene ammo for her boardroom circus. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Funny, I thought spying on neighbors wasn't in the bylaws either. Marlene ignored me, flipping through the photos like a prosecutor. "We cannot allow this level of neglect to continue. It undermines everything this HOA stands for." I looked around the room, locking eyes with a few neighbors who weren't clapping. People who'd had their own run-ins with Marlene's rulebook. People who looked tired of the show. So I planted the seed. "I'll be submitting my own report," I said calmly. "A full account of harassment, trespassing, and misuse of authority. If the board wants to play legal games, we'll play. Just remember, rules cut both ways." For the first time, I saw it. A flicker of unease in Marlene's eyes. She masked it quickly, slamming her gavel and moving to the next agenda item. But the damage was done. The whispers weren't just about Grandpa anymore. They were about her. Back at home that night, I watched from the porch as another car slowed in front of our house. Flash. Flash. Someone trying to capture proof of what? That the lawn chairs were still green? That the roses hadn't been trimmed that afternoon? Grandpa sighed beside me. "They won't stop." I put a hand on his shoulder. "No, they won't. But neither will I. Because while Marlene's spies stalked us with cameras, I had my own allies she knew nothing about. Allies with badges, with authority she couldn't fake with a gavel or a photocopied bylaw. And if she kept pushing, the next meeting wouldn't just be neighbors with folding chairs. It would be people she couldn't bully. Marlene called the cops to drag Grandpa out of his own house, but the officers who showed up weren't exactly on her side. Their cruisers rolled up with red and blue lights flashing against the oak trees, neighbors peeking through blinds like it was the season finale of their favorite soap opera. Marlene stood at the curb, arms folded, pearls gleaming, already savoring the victory she thought was hers. But when Deputy Harris stepped out of the car and his eyes landed on me, the whole scene shifted. The smug smile on Marlene's face wavered. Because Harris didn't see a helpless violator, he saw me. And he already knew this eviction circus was a fraud. The tension snapped tight like barbed wire. Every whisper from the porches, every crunch of gravel under boots, it all added to the theater of the moment. I could practically hear Marlene's thoughts. This isn't going the way I rehearsed it. But let me back up. The week leading to the spectacle had been pure HOA harassment. Letters slipped under Grandpa's door daily, each more dramatic than the last. Failure to remove unapproved structures. Continued degradation of property values. Final notice, eviction pending. They were printed on the HOA's letterhead, stamped in red, but nothing about them was legal. Just scare tactics dressed up in Times New Roman. Neighbors started treating Grandpa like a condemned man. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered, but a few brave souls came by with casseroles and quiet words. "She can't actually kick him out, can she?" they asked, as if I held the fate of the entire cul-de-sac in my hands. I reassured Grandpa every night, but I could see the toll it took. The man who once led platoons overseas now hesitated to water his roses, worried Marlene's spies were snapping photos. He asked me once, voice low, maybe I should just go, keep the peace. "No," I said firmly. "You don't surrender your home to a woman who thinks hydrangeas are a crime." Still, Marlene craved escalation, and she got it. A sheriff's notice appeared taped to the mailbox, handwritten, not official. It claimed law enforcement would assist in removing Grandpa for non-compliance. I knew immediately it was another bluff, but I also knew Marlene was arrogant enough to try to call it in for real, and she did. So when the squad cars arrived that afternoon, Grandpa sat in his recliner, tense but quiet, while I stood at the door, waiting. Marlene strutted behind them, already rehearsing the victory speech she'd deliver at the next HOA meeting. Deputy Harris adjusted his belt, tipped his head. "Well, if it isn't you," he said. "Good to see you too," I replied. "Though I can't imagine why you're here." Marlene cut in. "Because this property is in violation of HOA bylaws. We've issued notices, fines, and now he must be removed. This is our authority as a governing body." Harris raised a brow. "You think an HOA can evict a homeowner with no court order?" "Yes," she snapped. "It's in the bylaws." He chuckled, low and disbelieving. "Ma'am, bylaws don't override state law." The silence that followed was delicious. Neighbors leaned out of doorways trying not to grin. Marlene's face turned the color of overripe tomatoes. I stepped in. "Deputy, I've got documentation of every false notice she's issued. Harassment, fraudulent claims, even trespassing. I've been keeping a file ready for the county office." "Smart," he said, nodding. "Because calling us out here for a fake eviction? That's filing a false claim, and that's going to cost her." Marlene sputtered. "Excuse me, I am the president of this association. You can't—" But she didn't get to finish. Harris pulled out a citation pad. The scratch of his pen against paper echoed like thunder. Marlene's eyes darted left and right, realizing her audience wasn't applauding anymore. They were enjoying the show for a very different reason. Grandpa shuffled to the doorway then, steady despite his limp. "I served this country so people could live free in their homes," he said quietly, "and I'll be damned if I'm thrown out because of roses." The crowd clapped. Honest to God, clapped. That was the mini-climax, the moment her power cracked wide open. Harris handed her the slip, her manicured nails trembling as she took it. "Fraudulent reporting, harassment. Expect a call from the county," he said. I leaned forward just enough for her to hear. "Grandpa's not going anywhere, Marlene, but your little empire's crumbling." Her lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. She spun on her heels clicking furiously down the walk, neighbors whispering behind her. As the cruisers pulled away, Grandpa eased back into his chair with a long sigh of relief. But I knew Marlene wasn't done. A woman like that doesn't take humiliation lying down. She'd be plotting already, scheming behind lace curtains waiting for another chance. And that's fine, because if she thought today was her worst defeat, she had no idea what I had planned for the boardroom next.